Hi guys, I am back to help you with some shading stuff. I've had a few questions come up in class. I've seen a few things that I don't particularly want to see whenever I'm grading. So hopefully we're going to do some troubleshooting here. So this is my reference picture to start off with. And I have an example of some things that I'm already seeing that I don't necessarily love. And it's one of those things that I think that as an artist, unless it's pointed out to you, you're like, wait, what? What's the problem? Okay, so we're gonna look at a few things. So for example, I have this drawing here that is based off of this one. Okay, and there's a few things that are going on here that don't make it as awesome as it could be. And I'm wanting to see a little bit more awesome from us. Okay, so a couple of things. One, if you look closely at this, let me focus here. Okay, there aren't very many layers to this drawing. Okay, to be honest, I did this drawing in probably like 10 minutes, honestly, with the shading and everything. And there's not a lot of layers. There's not a lot of depth to this. Okay, it doesn't really look that realistic, does it? I mean, compared to the actual picture, not so much. I mean, it does look like the picture. The values are there, right? I have the light and dark areas. I have the shadows, okay? I have the texture. I have this kind of vignette situation going over here, okay? But it doesn't look very realistic. And I want to step my art up a notch, okay? One of the other things that I've been seeing around is whenever you first sketch out your drawing, it's good and important to have lines so you know that where your shapes go, you know where you're supposed to shade, all of that stuff. Okay, but what we don't want is to keep those lines. Okay, so for example, do you guys see this really harsh outline right here on the edge of the pencil? If you look over here, there's not a harsh outline, right? We don't see a really thick outline here. We can see the definite change between values, right? This is definitely like a medium gray and this is a lighter gray. We see that, but there's not a harsh line. Same thing here. These values are very close to each other. They're very similar, okay? But we still don't see a harsh line right there, okay? The only reason why we can tell the difference is because the value is a little bit different, and then the textures of the pencil and back here is a little bit different. Okay, same thing with our shadows. Okay, there's not really a harsh line, it's just a shape. Okay, so whenever I'm drawing this, I want to make sure that I don't have those harsh lines there. It's good to have a couple of lines sketched out so you know what you're doing and where you're putting things at. Okay, that's the building blocks, but we don't want to keep those harsh lines because they don't help anything other than to make it look less realistic. Okay, so again, this kind of hits the objectives that we're going for, but we're looking for more realistic, we're looking for more layers and better blending, okay? So what we wanna do is we're going to go ahead, I have actually drawn out here, it's kind of hard to see, I know, where things are going on my picture, okay? So instead of coloring or shading super harshly at first, I want to build up my layers. This is the same thing that I've been saying all along that we do whenever we work on our value scale and when we worked on our shaded sphere, okay? If you didn't get a super great grade on either of those, chances are you didn't build up like your layers like I've mentioned in the last two videos, as well as what we've talked about in class, okay? So when I say building up layers, okay, I mean that you are shading in one layer here, right? So I'm shading this in, and I'm just starting with this section right here. Okay, and then I go back over it and I add another layer to help smooth things out. So for this one, I colored in one direction. Let's get a little bit closer here. I might come back and shade in a different direction to help smooth things out a little bit, to add some layers of depth here. Okay, if you have a super dark section on your picture, absolutely just wailing on it gives it a weird texture. And it still doesn't give you that amount of depth that we're really looking for. It doesn't build up. Okay, we wanted to actually have some substance to it. Okay, so this is okay for now. I'm going to leave this for a little bit and I'll probably come back to it. Okay, then looking at my paper here, right, I notice that it's darker and then it's kind of lighter here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and work on that portion right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to press down a little harder. I'm not drawing a harsh line. I'm kind of shading in my line, if you will. Right, and I can go back and soften that as need be. Okay, and then backing off just a little bit so I have that separation there. Okay. And on my picture, it's harder to see kind of where the pencil, the wooden part and like the outer covering stop on this bottom section. Okay, especially in the picture, so I'm just kind of doing my best here. Okay, and then I can go back and add that another layer here. Okay, so at this point, this section right here has 2 layers on it. It's looking a little bit better, but I want to keep building it up. Okay, so I'm going to add a 3rd layer here. And it's kind of hard, I know it's hard to see on the camera. Okay, but the texture is evening out so much. See if I can focus that. Okay, the texture is evening out so much. It makes it look so much better. So if you look at this texture here compared to this texture, you guys see the difference? Okay, it's a lot smoother. It looks a little bit more solid. This has a lot of obvious lines to it. It's shaded in, yeah, but it still has a lot of the obvious lines. Okay, so I'm going to go through here and start shading this in. Let's add a 4th layer here. Okay, because I'm just building up my layers. Okay, again, I don't want it to be crazy textured. I just want to make sure that I have a nice amount of depth going on in this picture. Okay, so this looks pretty good here. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back and darken this up just a little bit more. I'm going to add another layer. So this one right here. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. Okay, and I'm going to see if I can get you guys a little bit closer. I think that looks better. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and add in this next texture here. Okay, and so I'm going to start kind of shading in along this line. It stays about the same. I think I want to darken this up just a little bit more over here. Okay, and then I'm going to start in with my first layer. Okay, and then we're going to build up again. Okay, so there's a pretty definite difference here. In my photo, it's a little bit harder to tell. I can kind of see a change in the texture more than I can see a change in the value. Okay, so I'm going to kind of get close to that, but not too close because I want to be able to add some of that texture in a little bit. Okay, so we're just building it up here. Okay, and I want to be, I'm going to go up a little bit closer. Make sure this is nice and solid through here. Okay, and part of the reason why I want to do this is because we have this line right here, and it's not really a line. I mean, it is, but it's not like just a single line. Okay, it's a very contrasting difference between the two, and so I want to make sure that it's nice and dark through here so that I have that contrast. Okay, so I want to make sure that it's nice and sharp. I don't want to make it too fuzzy. Down here it's more fuzzy, but up here it's nice and sharp. So I want to kind of keep that. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and add on here. There is a smooth transition between, a relatively smooth transition between the lighter top and darker bottom here. Okay, so I'm going to add a layer here first. Remember, layers are your friends. We want to build them up. Okay, let's do this over here. Okay, and I don't want to lose my kind of line that I had going on here, so I'm going to darken this up just a little bit. Okay, and I'm only doing this because I know that I need to darken up this area more compared to this one, based on my picture, right? But I'm going to darken it up to where that line disappears, and it's no longer a line, it's just a separation. It's just a difference. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm back to building this up here. I'm going to darken this just a little bit more. Okay, now, in order to get a nice sharp line, I'm using the tip of my pencil here, my pencil lead, and I'm just very, very lightly shading in. So it becomes a little bit of a sharper line without being too liney, if that makes sense. Okay, and I'm going to blend this down here. Okay, now one of the things that I want to keep in mind while I'm working on this is where there are highlights at. Okay, so if I look at my pencil here, okay, I know that it's a little darker here on the edge. It gets a little lighter, and then you can see where this lightness is right here. Okay, so I'm actually going to use a kneaded eraser to help me out with this section right here. Okay, and then notice it gets darker and then it's a little bit lighter. Okay, so I'm going to kind of darken this area up right here. And when I add in that highlight, it's going to make this shadow right here that I've made be more apparent because there's going to be more contrast. Okay, so I have my kneaded eraser here. Remember, if you have dark spots on your eraser, all you have to do is kind of pull it apart and squish it back together. You have to knead it, kind of like you do with bread dough if you're making bread. Okay, just on a smaller scale. Okay, so once you have that kneaded through, you can kind of just squish it back together. Sometimes I roll it on the table to kind of help out there. Now, you can shape it into any form that you need for this. Okay, so I'm going to take this, and because I have kind of a smaller area, I'm going to kind of pinch this here so I have more of an edge going on. Okay, And I'm actually gonna I'm gonna kind of pinch this out a little bit further. So it's almost flat, like a duck's bill, kind of. Okay. Now I'm going to, looking at my picture, which I know you guys can't really see because it's off camera. Okay, looking at my picture here, I'm going to lightly erase along this line here. Okay, so you can see how it's getting a little bit lighter. I can always go back and add some to it if I need to. Okay, and then I know that it's a little bit, there's kind of some shiny parts right up here. And so I'm just kind of like, almost like I'm drawing like little lines or kind of like dabbing at it. Here, because it's a little bit lighter on my paper. I'm gonna take a little bit more. Okay, now if I need to soften this, I can do two things. One, I can go back and shade with my pencil, or you can use your kneaded eraser again. I've changed the tip just a little bit, and I'm going to just kind of lightly dab along this so it's less of an obvious line and looks more like a realistic transition. Okay, we're getting a little bit closer. I think I'm gonna go back over it with my pencil just super lightly to kind of help blend this through. Okay, and you can choose how you do it based on your own artist intuition. Right, so sometimes you might lighten it a little bit too much, sometimes you might not lighten it enough. That's okay. You just go back and kind of fix at it. Okay, and so now I have this kind of like nice line here without being a super harsh line, and it looks more similar to what I have going on in the photograph right here. Okay, you can kind of see the difference a little bit more. Now I'm going to go ahead and shade in down here for this underside of the shadow, and I'm going to start off. So for me, on my picture, it gets a little darker here, and then it's a little lighter here, which I'll lighten up here in a little bit, and then it's darker again. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of go through and line this out a little bit so I know where this starts, but I don't want to go darker than what my shadow is going to be. So I don't want a harsh line here so much. I want more of like just a, hey, that's where the shadow is. So I've got that in there. I'm going to go ahead and lighten up this area just a little bit, and I'm just going to kind of lightly dab at it. Okay, and when you do this, you're just taking off the top layer of your graphite. Okay, so you can see how the kneaded eraser is getting a little bit darker. Kind of looks like a manatee right now, but it's getting a little bit darker because it's picking up the lead, right? So I'm just kind of dabbing a little bit. I don't want to take off too much because it's not crazy light right there. Okay, so I'm going to go back here, and then remember anything that I'm like, I don't really like that transition very much, I can go back and blend it out. Okay, and so I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to add on a nice first layer. Okay, notice how I am still holding my pencil the way that we always do, right? And I'm not harshly trying to get it as dark as I can on the first go. Okay, I'm just pressing hard enough so that we can see the difference between the pencil and the shadow a little bit more so. Okay, so let's see. It looks like it's darker closest to the object naturally. Okay, and I'm going to kind of shade and fuzz this out just a little because I don't want that harsh line. Okay, and again, I'm going to go over this part here because on my photograph, it's hard to tell exactly where it ends and where it begins. Okay, and then my shadow continues down here. And I'm just going to kind of go in with like a medium pressure on this one because I can build up the layers later as needed. Okay, now I feel like I've gone a little bit over my, have I gone a little bit over my line? No, I have not. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and darken this up though here a little bit. So I'm adding another layer. Remember, layers are your friend. Okay, and I might come back and add several more layers to this just to continue building it up. Okay, having more layers is really, really going to help you out so much. Okay, I'm going to go close here to sharpen this up a little bit. Okay, and then on this side, it's a lot fuzzier with how it hits. So I'm going to kind of leave that fuzzy. Okay, and then it kind of extends out here a little bit further. Maybe about this far. Okay, and it's a lighter shadow. It's kind of like that double shadow that we talked about when we drew our sphere. Okay, so I've layered this in here. Okay, I'm getting this weird texture because I have tape on my table. So I'm going to add another layer. Helps me get helps me get rid of that weird texture. Okay. And then I'm adding this right up here. Okay, so I've darkened this up quite a bit. I want to kind of darken the middle just a tiny bit too, because we have this weird like reflected highlight, or reflected light rather, underneath the pencil. Okay, weird things are happening here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the lead now. Now on my lead, it kind of follows the same line down here, right about here, where the bottom part is a little bit darker and the top part is lighter. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of darken in this bottom part here. Okay, and it is much darker than this part, the wooden part of the pencil. So I'm gonna kind of shade that in a little bit darker to begin with, and I can add some layers to make sure that it's nice and dark here just a little bit. Okay, so I have this line going here, and then looking at the nuances here, it might be hard to tell in the video, but the right here and across the top is actually a little bit darker than it is in this middle section right here. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that I'm doing that whenever I shade in this top half. Okay, so I have this here. And a lot of times whenever I am shading, I like to kind of go in and shade the darkest areas first, depending upon what I'm working on, right? So I'm kind of shading in, it looks like a line, right? But I'm kind of shading in here a little bit, and then I'm going to bring it down just a little bit here. It looks like it comes all the way down here. It meets that. Okay. Then I'm going to go through with a medium pressure to kind of help blend those out. And I still have a little bit of a harsh line. So I'm going to kind of go back and fuzz this out. And this I'm using kind of small circular motions to help get rid of that. Because I want the shadow there, I want the darkness there, but I don't want it to be blatantly obvious, because that's not how it is in the picture. Okay, so I've kind of fuzzed this out to where I have this slightly lighter area, right? And then it's still darker around here. Okay, let me make sure this kind of goes together. Oops. All right, and so this part right here, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of cleaning up. So I'm not really outlining. I think the motion is that I'm outlining, but I'm not actually putting a line here. I'm just kind of making sure that it's a solid shape. All right. Okay, so I have this here. I have this line going this way. I still feel like this is a little bit. I'm going to take a tiny bit off of here. I'm going to go back and blend it. All right, so I have a lot more depth going on. So if you look at the difference between this pencil and this pencil here, do you guys see how much different the layers are between the two? This looks a lot more realistic, especially if I put my picture in here. Let's see if I can get everybody in the frame. Okay, if I have this in here, which one of these looks more realistic? Which one do you think would get a higher grade in class? Okay, probably this one because it looks a lot more like the photo. Okay, even though I'm not even done, I haven't even finished the background or anything on it yet. Okay, it's a lot more realistic because I've used those layers to build up instead of what I have going on here. Okay, I also don't have harsh outlines. Okay, and then finally, I don't have the weird textures. I have a nice smooth texture, there's no harsh outlines, right? And it looks a lot more realistic because those layers are really, really helping me out. Okay, so on the background, I'm gonna go ahead and add in just a single layer. Actually, I'm gonna do this middle shadow first. Okay, and I'm just gonna do it kind of a medium for now, and I'll go back and refine this here in a little bit. So when I say that, I mean that I'm gonna go back and just kind of make sure that it looks more realistic. I'll go add some layers on later, but for now, I'm just kind of making sure it still has a place. So I don't lose it whenever I shade in my I guess my tabletop. All right, so this is shaded in. Okay, and I'll go back and look at the nuances, the little differences here in a little bit because it looks like there's a little bit of a halo here. Okay, anyway, back to our tabletop. So when I'm working on this background here, I'm just going to go very, very lightly at first. Okay, and you can use kind of a longer line thing. I wouldn't try to rush it though, okay, because our goal is consistency. Okay, we don't want anything to look particularly liney. That's what happens in here. And that's why I did this whole entire thing in like 10 minutes or less. Okay, and you see me working on this one for like, we're almost at the 30-minute mark. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through and shade in all along here. And I'm shading in as lightly and smoothly as I possibly can because my background isn't super dark. Oh, I'm losing that. Let's darken this up just a little bit. Okay, my background isn't crazy dark or anything like that. And I will add some more layers to give it more depth, right? We talked about gotta have that depth. That's what makes an art piece look more impressive, is if you have depth to it. Okay, there we go. So as I'm going, if I need to darken up an area like this shadow right here, might need to darken up just a little bit so I don't lose it. Oops. Sorry, I have those automatic lights. Okay, so I don't want to lose this line right here that I've already shaded in. So I'm gonna add just a little extra layer before I come in with my first layer that goes around it, my first pencil layer for the background, okay? And what I'm talking about is this shadow here, because the shadow is a little darker than the table, of course, that's how I can see it, right? And so I'm slowly adding a little bit more layers as needed. Okay, and I wanna make sure I keep this nice and smooth. Okay, so you can see how I'm shading in here, It's looking a little bit more realistic, okay? I know it's a little bit harder to see. Let's see if we can focus here. Okay. I don't even know if that helped. Okay, so it's looking a little bit more realistic than what I have going up here, right? The lines really don't help us out, okay? The outlines, I mean, okay? And then also just the texture in the background doesn't really help us out. Here, it's smoother and it's looking a lot more realistic. Can you guys see the difference here? It's super, super, super important that we work towards this because we want it to look as realistic as possible. That's part of our point of using the grid project is because it helps you create a more realistic looking drawing because everything looks proportional as it should be. Okay, so you can add in, darken this up just a little bit. Okay, and so by the time I'm finished, I will probably have this area nice and dark here because I've added so many layers. Okay, and I'm probably going to darken this up just a teeny tiny bit here. Okay, so we've layered this up. It looks a lot more realistic now, okay, compared to this top one here. Okay, this is what we want our projects to look like at the end. We don't want them to look like this, okay? Whenever we send pieces of artwork off to off to contests, or we put them in the show, the ones that receive more recognition are typically the ones that look like this because they don't have that outline there. Okay, it looks a lot more realistic because they don't have the outline. Okay, so you want to pay very, very close attention. It's going to get you a higher score on your project. It's going to look a lot more realistic, and you're going to be a little bit more proud of it because it's going to have a better score and you're going to have a more realistic drawing. Okay, so I'm kind of darkening this up here as well. Okay, and I'm kind of avoiding, do you see this like little white V emerging? That's because on my paper, I have kind of that same thing going on. If you look really close here, like almost like a weird little halo type of thing. Okay, so I'm kind of doing the same thing on my paper. Okay, so then I can go in and finish the back. I can work on the vignette, which is the darkened edges here, right? And then I can add in the textures of the table here. Notice that the textures are darker. They are the closer they are to the viewer, so the closer they are to you or the bottom of the paper, they look darker. And then further away towards the back or towards the top, they're a lot lighter and a lot more subtle. Okay, so you want to keep that in mind. Okay, for the texture on the pencil right here, I can add in those darker areas, kind of like so. And I don't want them to be super crazy dark because I want to have the texture there, but I don't want it to be the star of the show. Okay, the texture is not the most important part of my drawing on this one. Okay, I just want to add it there. I don't want it to be too distracting to everybody else, right? So I'm going through and I'm just adding a little bit of those textured areas in here. Okay, I'll bring it down here a little bit more too. Might have to use a little bit harder pressure in order to maintain that. Okay, and then so I have these textures in here. Okay, and then if you need to go through, you can add in using your kneaded eraser. Like so. Okay, you can go through and take off a little bit too, because there are some textured light areas. Okay, so I might kind of go through It's a little bit lighter here, closer to the lead. Okay, and then I have a few spaces through here. Okay, and I'm just kind of dabbing through here a little bit, and then up here a little bit closer to this part. Okay, I feel like this looks a little bit. There we go. All right, so that is how you create a more realistic looking piece of art without having those harsh lines. Okay, like I said, lines are really helpful for you in the beginning, but that's why we want to keep them nice and soft, because things in real life don't have harsh lines around them like a coloring book does. Okay, and we don't really want our artwork to look like it has been part of a coloring book, or that's what our intention was. Okay, we want to make it look realistic, especially for this type of project. Okay, there will be other times when we want a more harsh outline. Okay, but on this one specifically, we are working for super realistic. Okay, and I think that's all I have for today. This is way too long of a video. I love you guys. You're going to be great.